Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball. Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown, off-season episode 7. This week we actually wanted to kind of talk about something that's a little bit, I don't necessarily know fun, but just kind of interesting, and just looking at what the best World Series was of each decade. Part of the reason we wanted to talk about it in this format was it's easier to compare World Series against the other ones in their own decade because all of the players are much more contemporary. So I think that makes it a lot more of a fair comparison when you're only comparing, the World Series that took place in the 60s against one another rather than trying to compare one from 2016 against.
And we, I think, I don't know if you feel this way, but starting the decades with the actual number so that we just started the decade of the 20s, even though, it happened in October, but we had the greatest World Series of the 2020s is the one that just happened. It's the only one of the 2020s.
Right, yeah, so that was kind of going. Yeah, and for the practices of this episode, we're only doing from the 60s onwards, mostly just because it's a lot, just to cut down on time, and also just because we know this period a lot better, and so it's a lot easier for us to speak with more knowledge on the subject.
Fans know it better, too. I mean, let's face it, knowing this, what happened in the series in 1930s, you can look it up and talk about it, but
it's not the same.
Nobody has context like they do for the ones more recently.
So, I mean, starting off, what was kind of interesting looking at this was immediately what I noticed is in every single decade, there's at least one quality 4-3 series, like really good 4-3 series. So I think that immediately kind of makes it interesting, and that we really only had to look at the 4-3 series.
Right.
Because there were just too many good examples of them that you could have somehow had a 6-game or less series that was of a higher quality. That's just unlikely. And it just wasn't from what we saw. And then the other interesting thing I saw is that there have been a lot less 7-game series over time. We had a ton of them in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then they've kind of fallen off, though there was a resurgence during the 10s a bit.
So if we include the 2020 season from 1960, that's actually 61 years. There were 18 7-game series in that period. So a little less than 1 out of 3.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty good, actually, that you would think that you're going to get a 7-game series something like 30% of the time.
But then you look at from the 60s through the 80s, right? And you had what, like 15?
You had something close to that because you have, again, we're going to talk about the ones in all the decades.
We'll talk about them, yeah.
They all, there's a spate of them, and then all of a sudden...
Yeah, because you look at it, there was, just to look at it, there's what, 6 in the
60s, there's 5 in the 70s, and there's 4 in the 80s. 6, 5, 4. So
that's 15
right.
in 30 years. Mm-hmm. So 50% of them...
Every other year
you had a 7-game World Series, which it's interesting. You'd almost say that kind of corresponds with the explosion of baseball's popularity. Almost every single season you had most likely a pretty epic World Series.
Right. And I think you were making the point, before the show, just about how just because they go 7 games, doesn't necessarily always mean every game was a fantastic, game or a great series.
Right. And I can think because starting in the 60s, the one I would use as the example for that is the 67 World Series between the Cardinals and the Red Sox. Mm-hmm. Like every game wasn't close.
Undercurrent of that series would be that the Red Sox still hadn't won since 1918, so that's why everybody was super interested 50 years later.
Right, yeah, and that's why it's a very interesting World Series, but in terms of the interesting level of the games. And so for this one, it kind of feels bad for the 60s because it feels like there's a very obvious choice.
Right.
But I wanted, so for me, the obvious choice was the one that I went with, and that is the 60 World Series. It's kind of hard not to pick it.
Well, and there's so many things about that series. I'm not sure. I don't know if I'm thinking that there's one series in that. I might not pick that one, but I really like that one.
Well, there's another one that I wanted to give shout out to.
So that series, the Yankees hit 338 in that World Series. The Pirates hit 256. the Yankees outscored the Pirates 55-27, almost 2-1. Whitey Ford won 2 games, as did the Pirates had 2. So this is, everything.
But it's almost like I almost wonder if that's the kind of series that, outside of the home run, obviously in Game 7, that's more interesting looking back on it because you can see all of these interesting things that occurred to it. Whereas throughout watching the series, it might have made for a more boring series.
Right, because the Yankees kicked their butts.
In their 3 wins, they kicked their butts.
Right,
it wasn't close.
Right.
But then the Pirates eked out 4. And so that makes an incredible story and something incredible to look on.
A walk-off Game 7 home run.
And yeah, that's the problem. That kind of has to be it. You kind of have to pick it because of that. Because
I don't think it had happened before Mazeroski did.
In the first one, you kind of have to go with it. That was my problem.
So I also saw the MVP of that series, and Mazeroski had an excellent series and didn't win the MVP. Bobby Richardson, the Yankee second baseman, won the MVP.
What? That almost feels like a kind of thing where the writers wanted the Yankees to win, so they gave it to the Yankee player because they're annoyed or something. I don't know.
I also tracked the Yankees had 3 future Hall of Famers on their team. The Pirates had 2. Okay, and Mazeroski and Clemente, and the Yankees had Berra, and they had let's see, I'll think of it. That would be Roger Maris, I believe. No, he's not a Hall of Famer. What am I saying? Whitey Ford, obviously, and I'll think of the other. But so thinking of 3, 5 Hall of Famers, that you will find, and I have that for all the series. It's always interesting to look back and see how many guys
I'll
made
be
it.
very interested in that because, for me, then the other super interesting World Series in this decade was the '64 World Series.
Okay, go on.
With the Cardinals and the Yankees, because every game was crazy close.
And it's interesting because that season is known more for the Phillies' collapse, right? Leading with 15 games to play.
We talked about that,
right?
Collapse.
We talked about that, and so the Cardinals came back and not only won the pennant when they weren't expected to win the pennant, they beat the Yankees,
the juggernaut Yankees,
in a 7-game series that, as you point out, had some epic games.
Yeah, I think 5 of the 7 games were decided by 1 run or less. Run. Duh. And so that right there means every single game was down to the wire.
So the series goes: Cards win, Yanks win, Yanks win, Cards win, Cards win, Yanks win, Cards win. Had the series over, so that every other game
was just back and forth, that was the problem for this decade for me. Is it was really between these
hard to
two.
Hard to pick them.
It's hard to pick them because in terms of the series, it's the Cardinals series, but in terms of what it means for baseball, it has to be the '60 series.
So Brock and Gibson were your Cardinal Hall of Famers in 1964, and Whitey Ford and Mickey Mantle. I was the other guy I forgot from 1960 as well. He was on that team as well. So, but there are other really great series. The 62 series, the Yankees win 4-3. And what I always remember hearing about with that series is that Willie McCovey's up at bat. It's the 9th inning, winning run on base. And Bobby Richardson, who won the 60 MVP, makes the catch, line drive, caught, World Series over.
And that was the series where McCovey hit the longest home run he had ever hit in his life, right? Didn't he hit an absolute bomb in one of the games?
And absolutely, you're right. And all games were 4 runs or less margins of victory. So that's a tight series.
You didn't have any laughers, at least.
Ralph Terry, who was not a pitcher that a lot of people, I don't know, have you ever heard of Ralph Terry?
Never.
So Ralph Terry pitched a complete game 1-0 shutout in Game 7.
And that's the kind
he did win the MVP.
Yes. And considering later on that's a justification for something I'm going to use to talk about another series, you have to give a lot of credence to that.
So there were 7. By the way, the winning run in this series scored on a ground ball double play. So double play, 2 outs, run scores. That's the one run that holds up to win Game 7 in the World Series.
So weird.
So it wasn't even driven in by a hit. It was just
were they not playing
no RBI?
No RBI. That's so
no RBI.
It's got to be so weird. What
7
happened?
Hall of Famers.
Wow.
7 Hall of Famers. And we talked about McCovey already, Willie Mays, Cepeda, Juan Marichal, and the Yankees had Berra, Mantle, and Ford once again. So the 62 World Series, I think is there. And I think even the 65 World Series. So the 65 World Series was the last World Series in which Sandy Koufax dominated. The next year, he had a great season, but didn't pitch much in the 66 World Series, which the Orioles ended up winning, and he retired after that series. Yeah, because
he retired after 8 seasons, right?
No, he had the...
He got 10.
He's got his 11 seasons, so he qualifies for the Hall of Fame. What an interesting career, by the way, because we knock guys for short careers, but nobody knocks Koufax for it. And and nor should they.
Because it was just because
So dominant.
It's the same way if Trout had retired at 10, where you're just like, look, the peak was so good in those 10 years, he still deserves to be in.
So the 65 World Series, the home team wins the first 6 games, and then Sandy Koufax goes out and pitches a complete game, Game 7 against Jim Cott, who's a guy I would say should be in the Hall of Fame, but he is not, and he pitches a 2-0 complete Game 3 hitter. Game over.
Yeah, that's what you do when you're, a Hall of Fame pitcher.
So Minnesota only had one Hall of Famer on that team, the great Harmon Killebrew.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, and they were a new team, and we talked about how when the Senators moved, they'd only been in the league for 4 years, kind of like the Marlins a little bit.
So it was a big deal that they were even in the World
series.
Series.
Correct. That's a big deal.
And they would have probably been massive underdogs to what I imagined was a pretty stacked Dodger
a classically
team.
good Dodger team, Drysdale, Koufax,
because that's the thing. You always had Koufax and Drysdale.
And the good thing they had them because the Dodgers had no Hall of Fame hitters on that team. Nobody that batted for them ever made the Hall of Fame.
When you had Drysdale, Koufax, you almost could just get 4 wins in every series just off of that.
You talked about the 67 series, which I think, Gibson won 3 games.
Yeah.
Okay, so he gets the MVP. But that was at the time we talked about the lack of hitting in the major leagues. The Cardinals hit 223 for the series. The Red Sox hit 216. Sounds kind of boring.
It was not at all an interesting series there.
So the series I would pick is actually the next year, the 1968
You picked
World
the
Series.
68 World Series.
Yeah. And I think part of that was that I remember lying on the floor in my parents' bedroom watching Game 1 of the 68 World Series, and Bob Gibson struck out 17 Tigers. I'd never seen anybody do something like that. I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And it just so impressed the heck out of me. And Gibson, Mickey Lolich, ended up winning 3 games in that World Series, which was remarkable only in that the pitching star of that season was Gibson because of his 1.12 seasonal ERA, but Denny McLain won 31 games that season. The last guy to win 30 games, and really did nothing in the World Series. Mickey Lolich kind of, not say out of nowhere, but not as well known. He wins 3 games.
Yeah, he was not the guy that they were expecting to carry them in the World Series. You'd expect the guy that won 31 games to do it.
So and the Tigers hadn't won since 1945. So it's hard for us in context now to think about that. That's over 20 years later. And the Tigers are a great baseball franchise, and so it was a big deal for the Tigers to come back and win. And they had Al Kaline on the team. They had Eddie Matthews, who was there for not very long, but won a World Series with them. And Gibson, Steve Carlton was on the 68 Cardinals. Was not a primary pitcher, but did pitch. Cepeda and Lou Brock. So they had 4 Hall of Famers. I think that was just the most, and it was, for me, the TV coverage of that series really set it apart because it really sort of was watched across the country in a big way. Great World Series. So that's 6 in 1 decade.
Yeah, that's the biggest decade that we have to get through. The next one's pretty big too.
Right. So the 70s.
And interesting, it's a lot of the same teams.
Well, the 70s, I always like to say it was actually the 71 World Series. So the Pirates beat the Orioles in the 71 World Series 4-3, and the Pirates beat the Orioles 4-3 in the 79 World Series.
So and then that bookends a whole bunch of Athletics and Reds.
Yeah. Right, because now this is the era of the Big Red Machine, but the Oakland A's won 3 straight World Series in the 1970s.
Including 2 7-gamers.
Yeah. And the second of which, as a Met fan, we'll talk to a little bit, that was a World War II. The Mets were kind of lucky in a way to get to the World Series that season.
We can start with that since we're there. And that was why this wasn't one of my choices.
I agree.
Was that the Mets kind of, you don't want to say fluked their way to 3 wins, but they were not exactly what you call convincing wins, considering how thoroughly they were kind of beaten in the other games.
And yet the A's scored 21 runs in the entire World Series. The Mets scored 24.
But it just never felt like, you just look back at those games and the stats and stuff. And
both teams did hit, very low,
blistering,
very low averages, into 209 or something like that. But the A's had 3 future Hall of Famers. Catfish Hunter, Raleigh Fingers, and Reggie Jackson, who was a great player.
The Mets would have had any.
The Mets had a guy named Tom Seaver.
I didn't know if Seaver was.
He was still a primary player.
Yeah, that is only 4 years from '69.
So that particular World Series, the Mets, there were Jackson, Hunter Fingers, and Mays. Willie Mays was also on the Mets.
Okay,
but that was William. Yes, exactly.
And very aged William Mays.
That was not a great World Series. I think we would both say Gene Tennis was the winner of the in the year before. Ever heard of Gene Tennis?
No, never.
Yeah. He was a catcher for the A's. He won in 72. What do you know about the 72 World Series?
That was actually my choice.
Okay, go ahead. Okay,
because
good.
this one, I thought, You're
right, by the way.
This was just
6 one-run games. Are we done yet?
Yeah, like in between two, this was the rise of the Red Machine, really, because this was like their first kind of like breakout season in this decade, getting to this point, and though they would later on in the decade really kind of take over.
Well, this was the start of their 3-year run.
This was the start of them, but this was the start of the Athletic 3-year run.
Right.
But it's also kind of the announcement of the arrival of the Reds.
Yes, you're right. That wasn't quite the big Red Machine just yet.
It was the formation that this team was going to be trouble.
Great point. And that's the series. I made the mistake. That's the series where both teams hit 209 as a team. The A's scored 16 runs in 7 games.
Right, but it made every game just so...
They won!
Yeah, but it was such a tense series. That's what made it so interesting.
The Reds scored 21, by the way, and lost.
Because in the couple of games that, like, in the couple run one... I think they won, like, 8-1 in one of the games or something. Like, one of the games, they blew them out.
And the MVP of the American League in 1972 was one Reggie Jackson, who did not play in the World Series. He pulled a hamstring trying to steal home in the last game of the League Championship Series and sat out the entire World Series.
Could you imagine if a player did that today?
Right.
He would get crucified.
Trying to steal home. Reggie Jackson.
Like, they would be like, what are you doing?
I thought that was quite a little interesting footnote there.
There's still other interesting World Series, though. That was probably the one I spent the most time on in this decade.
Yeah. And we talked in 71, by the way, the great Roberto Clemente won the MVP, and that was just a year before he tragically passed away. And then so the series that most people talk about when the 1970s are discussed is the 1975 World Series.
Yeah, that's kind of the other choice because, again, interestingly enough, because of the storyline. The Red Sox with this is their second big shot since the 67 World Series.
Correct. And the Reds hadn't won, by the way, since 1940 or something like that. So they had not won a World Series, in a very long time.
Mm-hmm. So that was a big deal. It was kind of like the later World Series we're going to get to in the 10s. Where you had two teams, no matter who won, one of them was getting a monkey off their back.
So, people say that this was the greatest World Series of all time for years. And the epic shot of Carlton Fisk waving the home run, fair.
But that's the series, I think, where the narrative, now that people are looking back on it, it's lost a little bit of its luster, I feel like. People don't rate it as highly as a lot of the other series.
There were 5 one-run games. That's pretty good. And, the Reds had the Hall of Famers in Bench, Morgan, and Perez. And they also had Pete Rose, so
only Pete Rose.
And the Red Sox had Yastrzemski and Carlton Fisk. And they had 2 other great players that are almost guys in Tiant and Dwight Evans. So I think you have, Pete Rose was a series MVP. It was a great World Series.
It was, yeah. It's just interesting that, like, I think people look back on it less fondly now than they did right after it happened.
Well, because there have been a lot of great World Series since then, so that maybe that held up for the prior 30 or 40 years. But there's been ones that have supplanted it. I think there have been so many more comic images, and especially with the advent of TV, I think that shot of him waving at the ball is less impactful now than it was back then, because that was one of the first of its kind of this epic, memorable TV having
moment.
a video recorded like that, yes. And one footnote on the 1973 Met loss in that World Series. I remember that for the series in which Charlie Finley, who owned the A's, fired his second baseman for making errors during the World Series, and they had lodged a case against Finley, and Major League Baseball Bowie Kuhn told him he had to reinstate the guy.
Wow.
The guy named Mike Andrews, I guess I still remember this and all that, but he got fired for making errors by the owner during the World Series.
That's something that would never happen today.
Right. So the last one would be the other Pirate World Series.
Yeah, the bookends of the decade.
And that was the We Are Family where Sister Sledge Song from that year became the rally
Anthem,
cry.
yeah.
Sort of like, what was the hockey team? Gloria for the Blues, who just won the Stanley Cup. They would always be playing. It's like, why are you associated with this song? Well, this was a big song at the time, the Sister Sledge Song. And they had aged Willie Stargell, who was the series MVP, Pops, and got his, World Series win again. That was the second one of the decade. And the Pirates had some really great players. And that was a 4-3 World Series, and the Pirates came back from a 3-1 deficit.
Yeah, that is the kind of why that one is remembered, because of that comeback.
But when I look back through this thing, and I'm a big baseball fan. I looked at, okay, here's your Game 7, 1979 World Series. Grant Jackson beat Scott McGregor 4-1 in Game 7.
Ugh.
Have you ever heard of either of those pitchers?
No.
Yeah, right. Most people have not.
That kind of hurts.
Why were they pitching Game 7?
Yeah.
So 2 future Hall of Famers for each. Jim Palmer and Eddie Murray.
Pretty good players.
Yep. And Willie Stargell and Bert B. Home Blyleven, as Chris Berman would say. So I didn't realize that Blyleven was on that team, and it took him a long time to get elected.
So that claps out the 70s, and now you get on to the 80s.
It's going to go faster now because we don't have that many.
Yeah, there's only 4 in this one.
Yeah, right.
And I feel this one's a little indulgent, but it's so easy. I mean, is there any other choice for this decade?
So am I going to pick the best World Series of this decade? Okay, let me think about that first, because I have them in chronological order. But you go first. Go ahead. Talk.
No. You go. Let's go in chronological order. Let's do this what it's due, because it's as Met fans, it's so obvious which one we want to go with.
Here's the thing, right? I'm not going to pick the same one.
You're not going to go.
I'll go against it. I'll just go against it, just for the sake. Anyway, the first one is, I would not consider the greatest World Series of the 80s, but it was an interesting World Series, the 82 World Series.
Between the Cardinals and the Brewers.
Where Keith Hernandez and the Cards beat the Brewers 4-3. There were 5 future Hall of Famers in this World Series.
Should be 6.
Bruce Sutter, Ozzie Smith. Yes, you're missing Keith. And then Robin Yount, Ted Simmons, and Paul Molitor for the Brewers. So obviously a very good hitting team.
It's funny,
no Brewer pitchers.
It's interesting because to me, I always think of Paul Molitor like as a more contemporary player for me.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, he was a DH probably into the 90s.
Into the 90s, so I have like vague recollections of him as a player.
Yeah. And a pitcher you probably haven't heard of, Joaquin Andujar.
No.
Right, and good. I'm better off me pronouncing it because I heard it before I had to try and read it. Won 2 games for St. Louis, including Game 7, which was saved by Bruce Sutter. So, the MVP of the series was Darryl Porter, who was a catcher.
A lot of catchers.
That actually ended up going to Kansas City and winning a World Series with them later in the 80s.
Interesting. 2 guys in the same World Series did that.
Well, in fact, the next one would be
that one.
Right. So Darryl Porter goes from St. Louis to Kansas City, and he ends up taking and going to the World Series with them in '85. And I could pick this World Series as I thought was just the most interesting World Series I've seen, and then until my team won it the next year. So
yeah. So let's just give this what it's due.
So yeah, that was the Brett Saberhagen World Series.
He was dominant, right?
He was dominant. We don't have the '88 World Series on there, in which the Dodgers beat the A's. Earl Hershiser had an amazing season and had all this.
That was his like crazy.
Correct.
Year,
so Saberhagen had the same kind of thing going on in 19, and he was. I think his wife had just had a baby, so they kept showing, or she was pregnant during the dugout, and him thinking, "Oh, is my wife giving birth to the baby while I'm trying to win the World Series?" They had this thing going on during the World Series.
That was like a storyline. They're like, "This is really good. People might like this."
So you had Ozzie Smith and George Brett.
2 pretty good players.
Yeah, as part of that World Series. Saberhagen, who, again, another guy you could make a case for a Hall of Fame career. Jack Clark, a really good ball player. Willie McGee, Pendleton. John Tudor was a noted Met killer. You probably haven't heard of him. Great left-handed pitcher. Not a Hall of Fame guy. So just a lot of really good, players on these 2 teams that made it a really interesting series. Highlighted, though, by the Royals coming down from 3-1, helped by a Don Denkinger call at first base that will forever bug the Cardinals. A Jorge Orta getting called safe instead of out, changed the World Series. Kansas City comes back, and then they whitewashed the Cardinals 11-0 in
because
Game
from
7.
ranking a series, a moment like that actually kind of helps it. Even though it was an error, the fact that it happened makes it a more interesting World Series.
You can say Don Denkinger to any Cardinal fan, like, that guy. He killed us.
So, and then the next year, you're followed up with I mean, to me, this is one of the this is up there. This would be in most people's top 5, I feel like, for all-time World Series.
Well, and I think you said it before, situationally, right? So think about the teams, and particularly the Red Sox.
Yeah, the Red Sox again.
Right.
This is now the third decade.
We're 68 years later.
Yeah, the third decade in a row with their chance. You have an all-time Game 6, topped off with the ball going through Buckner's legs. But then I think, as you correctly pointed out to me last week, what often gets lost in the shuffle was that how good Game 7 was as a follow-up. Because that was a one-run game, right?
Right. Too. The Red Sox went out to a 3-0 lead, and then the Mets, and they had Bruce Hurst on the mound. So this is really important because Clemens was the pitcher on the Red Sox, right? No, Bruce Hurst killed the Mets. He had already won 2 games in the World Series. The Mets couldn't hit him. They just couldn't get to this guy. And he was dominant in that World Series. So then the Red Sox put up 3 runs. It's 3-0. The Mets are down against. Oh, we got all the way back here.
Now we're going to get shut down by
this. It's going to be over, right? And sure enough, the Mets came back and from 3 runs down, they tied it up 3-3 and ended up going on to win. And Roger Clemens, though he did win a game in that World Series, was not the pitching star. It was the other guy, Bruce Hurst.
Another one of those weird things, like that other series we were talking about earlier from the 60s, where like Mickey Lolich won 3 games out of nowhere when he wasn't the guy on the team.
Right. Bruce Hurst had a very good season.
Right.
But it was still Roger Clemens had an amazing season and was thought to be the star.
He was the guy that everybody expected to be the one dominating that World Series.
Oil Can Boyd on that team, who was a really interesting pitcher to watch. Ray Knight won the MVP, and I deservedly so, because he hit 390 or something like that in the World Series. But there was not a big time hitting World Series by any stretch of the imagination. No. But just the
drama of that series,
the Red Sox on the top step, the whole thing, that's what made it a memorable World Series.
Right. The Red Sox literally being as close as they could have been and then not being able to get over the finish line.
But the series the next year, kind of gets lost, because we had a great 85 World Series. We had a great 86, memorable 86 World Series.
You had 3 straight Game 7 World Series.
And then, in 87, the Minnesota Twins. They take out the Cardinals 4-3 in a series in which the home team wins every single game.
Yeah. That's a very interesting kind of situation where you got a series like that. I feel like were there any bottom of the 9th victories in that series, though?
I don't have that.
Because that would actually really hurt that series, in my opinion, because then you never actually play a full game.
that ballpark, was known as the Homer Dome at the time.
The Minnesota ballpark?
Yes. So the ball would just fly out of there, and the Twins out-homered the Cardinals 7-2. And the Cardinals, in the mid-'80s, were a speed team. They were not a power team. They had a guy on their team named Tommy Herr, who one year hit 9 homers and drove in 110 runs. That's pretty hard to do.
Yeah, like that kind of tells you what kind of team they were. They were just we're gonna
Vince Coleman, Ozzie Smith, Willie McGee. We're gonna run,
hit and run, steal bases.
Right, Roddy Herzog's the manager, so that's the kind of thing. And in the Cards had Ozzie Smith on that team as their Hall of Famer. Puckett and Blyleven were on the Twins, but the Twins had a lot of good, not great players. Kent Herbeck at first base, who had a very good career.
It's kind of
Gaetti,
the rare kind of time where to take an example for another sport, because I don't remember if there are any Hall of Famers on that team. The 04 Pistons.
Yeah.
I don't know there was a Hall of Famer on that team.
Right.
And they dismantled the Lakers that season.
Right.
Because they were just a team of
played
really
better of destiny, a team of destiny. And a future Met and former St. John's pitcher was the MVP and did win Game 7 for the Twins, Frank Viola. Another guy who had a very nice career.
Yeah.
Almost guy, though. Almost guy. So as we come down, there's not that many left. We got the 90s, only 2 in the 90s.
And I felt like this one was a pretty easy one. And that's the 91 World Series.
Once again, the Twins.
Once again, another epic Game 7. Because that's the Jim Morris game.
Jack Morris. Jack Morris pitched a 1-0 shutout in Game 7. Yep. And the Braves kind of out-hit and out-pitched the Twins in that series. Again,
it's kind of similar to there was a World Series we talked about that. There's a couple World Series like this where it's just like one team kind of just found a way to win 4 games.
Right. Jack Morris is a Hall of Famer, as is Kirby Puckett. And you have guys named Smoltz and Glavine that are starring for the Braves, and another pitcher named Avery who was pretty good for them.
Yeah,
Steve Avery. Yeah. They had quite the young guy. So the MVP, Jack Morris, just to really, coming up with a Game 7 complete game shutout makes the series way up there, right? Because that's an epic, like Ralph Terry's series where he won 1-0 in 1962.
That means something. Having that kind of epic Game 7 really helps.
But would you? So of the two, you've got two, and then you've got the other one,
the Marlins and the Indians in '97.
Game 7 walk-off single.
It's pretty good.
Pretty good. Who was the guy that did it? Edgar Renteria.
Edgar Renteria. Wow.
Yeah.
A young Edgar Renteria, right?
Yes. Because he starred in another series later on for another team, not a 7-game series. So the MVP of that series was Livan Hernandez.
Because that was his magical. That was like that first year he came up and he was unbelievable, right?
So exactly. So Game 7. So here it is. It's the Indians. Well, let's say 1997. So the Indians haven't won in a long time, right? They haven't won since 1948. So that's already 50, coming up on 50 years. The Indians lead 2-1 in the 9th inning. We're gonna win. We're gonna win, just like they were against the Cubs in 2016. We're gonna win.
It's gonna happen,
and it didn't happen.
Yeah. You had two good ones, and I think that's what's kind of the interesting comparison, because I felt like the two then you end up getting in the aughts, one of them was great. I don't care for the other one. I didn't think it was a great series.
Okay.
So you have the 0-1 World Series with the D-backs and the Yankees, and yeah, okay, that you put the stamp on it, we're done here. Like, got Game 7 alone with Luis Gonzalez getting the game-winning single off Mariano Rivera to win the World Series. To beat that series, you're gonna, because nobody expected the Diamondbacks to win that series.
And it was such a pitching dominated series because you had Johnson and Schilling shared the MVP for the Diamondbacks
because they were unhittable in that series. They won the 4 games that they pitched, right?
Yep.
And the other 3 games, I think the D-backs just got beaten by the Yankees.
So, Matt Williams is on that team, another really good player. Clemens. And then you had 2 almost guys, Bernie Williams and Posada.
Yep.
That are on the Yankees. So, yeah, besides Jeter, obviously.
Jeter.
Being at that team. And Mariano Rivera. So that's some pretty good players in that World Series. And it was probably going to be the best World Series until the one that happened the next year.
See, it's interesting. I don't this was such a weird one to look back on for me, because I remember this one very clearly. And at the time, the Angels were considered huge underdogs in this series.
That was the whole Rally Monkey series.
Right. And they played this weird style of hitting it. They were hitting and running. But looking back on that series, it feels much more like the Angels should have won this. Like, how did we not think they were going to be the ones to win this World Series? Were we all just so caught up in Barry Bonds because that was the 73 home run season?
Yeah, I think it ended in sort of a boring Game 7, and I think that really hurts. That the Giants led Game 7 1-0, and then the Angels got 3 runs in the 3rd inning, and that was it. So you just played it out, and it sort of takes there's not a lot of drama when a team
kind of just sucks the air out of it.
Holding off, okay, we've got a 4-1 lead, and we're just going to play it out. And the thing about it is there were 0 Hall of Famers, future Hall of Famers in that World Series.
That also kind of is what hurts it, is that you don't have you only have Bonds. Now Edmonds would have played in that World Series for the Angels, right?
I believe you're right. I believe
so.
No,
he might have been a Cardinal.
Nobody on the Angels was even close to being a Hall of Fame. Well, who was the MVP? An Angel, a guy. I don't even know if you know this player very well. Big third baseman from the West Coast, Troy Gloss.
Yeah,
Troy Gloss. And so they had Kent.
Angels had like Darren Erstad,
Kenny Lofton. So you have 2. The Giants had 2 almost guys for sure. We think Kenny Lofton should definitely be in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, unquestionably.
And a lot of people would argue Jeff Kent, should be there as well. So I would agree that 2001, definitely, particularly having the Yankees not win another World Series after they had won in 98, 99, and 2000. So that's a big deal.
And then you get to the 10s. And this one might be the hardest one of all.
It really, well, I think I know what your favorite is, but let's see if
this one's hard because it's really difficult to pick, in all honesty. I think that the problem is there's one that kind of stands out the most because the Game 7 was that epic, and because of what it meant to both teams.
We're going to pick the same one.
Yeah, it has to be this 2016
yeah,
one.
I agree.
Like, the Cubs and Indians, both teams, Cubs getting their first World Series in literally 100 plus years. And the Indians are at like 70 something, right? They're up there.
Yeah, right, since 1948.
Yeah. So no matter what, one team was getting an epic monkey off their back. You have
not a rally monkey, an epic monkey.
an epic monkey. Yeah, you had the unbelievable home run by Rajah Davis.
Rajai Davis, right? I forgot about
that. In the 8th inning, and then the Cubs come back and win it. And the Indians, like, to have that epic of a Game 7 makes it really hard to beat when there was so much storyline for that series.
So true, and you know the Indians, the Cubs get 2 in the top of the 10th inning, and the Indians just get 1, and they fall a run short. And the Cubs win their first World Series in 108 years, coming back from a 3-1 games deficit, and leaving the Indians to be the team that hasn't won for the longest time. There's just so much.
It's like one of those rare things where everything came together. You got the story and the games.
Can you tell me who the MVP was of that series? Because I didn't remember.
I don't remember either.
Ben Zobrist. Ben Zobrist was the MVP of that team. So you know there are 4 other 7-game series in
and there were a lot of good ones. I think the first one in the decade it was a good series, but I think it kind of loses out in comparison.
I would have it lowest
on
my list. Yeah. I agree.
That's the Cardinals-Rangers one from 11.
Although 3 games had the winning team scoring their winning run in their final time at bat. 2 walk-offs.
Yeah, that's...
Well, hold on.
It's just...
Pujols, Berkman, Yadier, Matt Holliday.
There's just something forgettable
I agree.
about that series.
I'd hate to say it, to a certain degree, it might be the Rangers.
Yeah.
That there was such an anomaly for the Rangers, to be, in the series. They are not in very often.
It was kind of like, congratulations for getting here. You played a great series. Kind of like that, which series was it here? That Twins World Series in 65, where, like, good job, you guys got here, and we didn't expect you to get here that quickly.
And the Rangers had Beltre on that team. Josh Hamilton, who at the time was a really good player. Nelly Cruz, my God, that guy has been around for a long time.
The ageless one.
Absolutely. And Chris Carpenter wins, Game 7 with unspectacularly with 4 relievers. David Freese is the series MVP. Just, it's got a lot, just not enough to be better than
especially compared to some of the other ones.
Right. The other one is the 2014 World Series that we haven't talked about with Madison Bumgarner with his 5-inning save in Game 7. So that's that. There you go, right there. That's epic.
That's epic right there. And that was a really good series because that was back and forth.
5 games won by 5 runs or more, and 2 1-run games. So either it was a blowout or it was a tight game.
And you had tight games in I think Game 7 was a tight game, right?
It was obviously.
Yeah.
Now it's a 3-2 giant win when he pitched 5 innings, scoreless fall to get the save.
After dominating like Game 5.
Right. He had just come back. You're exactly right. It was Game 5. And what I saw was interesting is they only had 5 home runs in the entire series. Total.
Neither of those were big power teams. Yeah.
So that's like got to be one of the lowest home run totals ever in a World Series. And the one that I'm sure the Dodger fans, and now they got Bauer and they won the World Series.
So the monkey is a little,
but they still are mad about 2017. Obviously,
they will always be mad about that.
And I don't want to get into all that kind of thing because the Astros won the World Series, and you could talk about it all you want. 25 home runs in that World Series.
Yeah, I remember them just crushing the ball.
But only 2 games had 4 runs or more margins. Everything was 1 or 2.
Yeah, there was a lot of solo home runs.
2 extra inning games.
Yeah, which is what elevated. That's what made this decade tough. Is that the next one too that happened 2 years later.
George Springer, by the way, was your
MVP. Yeah, because he hit 4 home runs in that World Series or something.
Now Toronto Blue Jay.
Yes.
And then the last one of that
2019, the Nationals and the Astros, and this was a good one. As much as it sucks to say. This is a good World Series.
So oddly enough, the first game was the only 1-run game. But what makes this remarkable to me is we talked about the Twins World Series being the home team won every game. The away team won every game in this World Series. So that's just so odd.
But in some ways that makes it great because you had last ups in every game. So there was heartbreak in every game because never a team could come back in that final inning.
Right. No lead was safe or you didn't feel like you had to put away. And yeah, absolutely. And Strasburg, rightly so, won the MVP. He was great. He was great in that World Series. But the 2016, I'd agree, would be
The problem for all of the other ones was that the 2016 was a good World Series if you remove all of the narrative elements. On its own, it would be a contender. But then you add in all of the narrative elements around it, and the others just never had a chance.
But I think there is something to say, and maybe if we do the 1900s through the 1950s, that if you're going to have a Game 7, it really helps if there's something distinguished. If you just having a blowout in Game 7, like the 11-0 blowout,
hurts you almost more than anything else.
It's like, oh yeah, that was it. Okay, it was a great series though for the first 6 games.
You need to have that Game 7 because one of your competitors will, and unfortunately, in a 7-game World Series, the 7th game is the most important one.
Absolutely. So stay tuned for future episodes. We're hoping to get our first guest on the program. We're not going to tease out who it's going to be, but if you've got suggestions for topics, please let us know at almost. Cooperstown@gmail.com and tweet us at almostcoop, my mistake, or hit us up on our Facebook page.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
And you can follow us on Twitter at almostcoop.